If you've got a Bible this morning, go ahead and be opening up, turning to Ezekiel chapter 37. Yes, I know that's not the passage we just read, but it is on purpose, so we're going to be doing a little reading from there this morning. And as we begin opening those, finding those passages, I want to begin by telling you something that I watched recently. I was checking out some of those reality TV shows, you know, the ones where they bring talented people in and they say, we're going to possibly give you an opportunity to do a show in Las Vegas, but what we want to do is have you try out and go through this whole process, and we're going to choose an eventual winner. And one of the gentlemen that came up was a fantastic illusionist, and I really appreciated some of the unique things that he did in his show. And as I watched him, I stood back a little bit, and I remembered, as I was young, I used to love watching magicians. You know, I don't understand why, but that rabbit out of the hat always captivated me. The idea of being able to pick my card out was so cool. I tried to learn these tricks, and I had someone really show me one time, and I never could get it right. I tried to show all my friends, never worked out. So I always ended up appreciating what they were able to do. And looking back on some of the great illusionists through the years, I've watched old videos of people like David Copperfield, and his illusion of making the Statue of Liberty completely disappeared. And, you know, I've watched people, you know, a little bit farther on down the line, like Criss Angel Mind Freak, and one where he appeared to walk on water. And of course, the great Harry Houdini, who obviously there's not much out there to watch of him, but there are some people who've recreated some of his stunts. And one in particular was a favorite of Houdini, and it's one that he actually created. And it was called the famous water torture cell. And it was one that he developed, and he actually performed this for 14 years. Nobody else at this point could even figure out how he accomplished it. And it was something he took great pride in performing. It was something that he dazzled his audiences with, all the way up till the day he died. And the illusion consists of three parts. And you can have a little bit of a picture there. The first thing is that the magician's feet are locked into stocks. The next part is that he's suspended in midair from his ankles with a restraint brace. And then he's lowered headfirst into this tank. And it's overflowing with water, and as it gets all the way closed, the restraint is locked to the top of the cell. And the escape became so popular that he would give, 20-minute lead-ins, where he would have many people come up and inspect various parts of the trick that he was going to be doing. And all the while, it was just a complete mystery. And even after he died, it took at least 10 years before the first person was able to figure out how he did it and accomplish it again. Now, how illusionists perform these feats, even as mundane as the card tricks that I was talking about, all the way up to these more meticulous escape acts, they're all very closely guarded secrets. The phrase in the industry has come to be, heard, I'm sure, by many of us, that a magician never reveals his secrets. But we do know that stunts like these are designed to use distraction. And that's the only way they're able to be successful. While they're talking to you over here, something else is going on the other end. It's their way of making sure that they're able to safely do these things without, giving away how it's being done. And it's a really cool concept that they've come up with. It's a sleight of hand. It's a lot of illusion. And, many of the teens could tell you there's an illusionist that comes to some of the youth rallies. He does amazing things. One, I think specifically, he has a table that he moves around a little bit and does different things at, and all of a sudden, he lifts his hands up, and the table's attached to his hands, and he's just moving it around like this. Never figured out how he did it. Never really tried to figure out, but it's incredibly cool to see how these things get played out over time. But if we want to be completely honest, there is an illusionist who's far better than any of these guys that I've mentioned. Houdini, Criss Angel, David Copperfield, probably believed to be the best magician and illusionist out there. They don't come close to the one that we know as the deceiver. Satan himself is probably the greatest illusionist we have ever experienced. He's been doing it since the beginning of time to mislead people, to separate us from the Lord. And as we start to build some background coming into Ezekiel chapter 37, we have to really start with a major event in Israel's history and take a look at King Solomon. Now, we know Solomon. He's a very wise man. He was a man who, when given the opportunity, he didn't ask for riches. He didn't ask for long life. He didn't ask for all the things we'd probably want to ask for. He asked for wisdom to guide the people correctly. But even Solomon, as wise as he was able to be deceived. He was able to be distracted from what God was really intending for him. And over time, what you have is he gets into this position where great wealth is a distraction. There's a reference in the Old Testament that talks about how silver was so common that it was despised among the people. And now, today's world, we can't truly imagine that. The silver is a precious metal. It got great value. To think that somebody would look at it and say it's worthless must have been amazing riches at that time. And Solomon was also distracted by women. I forget the exact number, but the man had far too many wives. I'll leave it at that. And then he was distracted by power. He wanted to leave himself a legacy, so he built up these great citadels, defense fortresses, and things that would last for generations to come. But Solomon's distraction leads to great sin. Solomon's distraction leads to idolatry, and it eventually breaks the nation spiritually. So much so that after his death, the kingdom divides, and you have a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. And so begins the downward spiral of Israel into the kings of the north, the kings of the south, who were very, very wicked. And as we get down through this time period, we're looking at Ezekiel, who began his prophesying 5 years after the Babylonians came and deposed Jehoiakim, who was the king of the south at the time. And so he's probably about 30 years old from what we know, and he is considered one of the major prophets. So it's not a great long time before he starts until the time that Israel is eventually exiled. So we've got the major prophets. There's a few of them here. Jeremiah, we got Ezekiel, we've got Isaiah. We know those. They're very popular. We know Daniel. A little bit of a different scenario with Daniel. He was completely in the exile. But Ezekiel was kind of in both, before exile and after. They think he was part of a small group that was originally exiled before the full destruction of the temple. And in this book, it also has some very interesting things that we don't see in the other major prophets. I mean, there's a lot of similarities in that there's, a coming condemnation for the nation of Israel. The people are going to be sent off into exile if they don't change their ways. That's a common theme through all your prophets. But in this one, there's also a lot of very strange imagery. And as we start to look at this morning, I want us to read verses 1 through 14 of Ezekiel chapter 37. The hand of the Lord was on me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and sent me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones, and he led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. He asked me, "Son of man, can these bones live?" I said, "Sovereign Lord, you alone know." And then he said to me, "Prophesy to these bones, and say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life, and then you will know that I am the Lord." So I prophesied as I was commanded. And as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound, and the bones came together, bone to bone. And I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. And then he said to me, "Prophesy to the breath. Prophesy, son of man, say to it, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Come, breath, from the four winds, and breathe into these slain, that they may live." So I prophesied as he commanded me, and breath entered them. Then he came to life. they came to life and stood up on their feet, a vast army. And then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the people of Israel. They say, our bones are dried up and our hope is gone. We are cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. My people, I am going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel, and then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord, when I open your graves and bring you up from them. I will put my spirit in you, and you will live, and I will settle you in your own land. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken, and I have done it, declares the Lord. Now, immediately in this passage, we come across a question from God. Son of man, can these bones live? Now, by this time in Ezekiel's prophesying career, I'm sure he's seen a lot of strange visions. And every time I read this one, I can't help but think of the scene from Jason and the Argonauts where skeletons come up out of the ground and start looking like a vast army. But when I read this, he clearly doesn't know what he's going to say at this point. His obvious answer is, well, no, bones dried up, they don't live again. It's not something that happens. It's outside the norm. So the obvious answer to this is no. Bones don't just get up and start walking. If they do, we should be worried. But he doesn't respond like we would expect him to. He responds by saying, only you, sovereign Lord, can know. Only you can know. So he kind of puts it back onto him and says, at this point, God, you've shown me some pretty crazy things. I'm going to step out a little bit on faith here. Outside of the normal, but you could probably do it. I'm not saying you can't. And I think in the question, Ezekiel is struggling with a little bit of a distraction in himself. He's kind of come to a point where he's discouraged. And, think about it. At this point in time, how many prophets have come? You could go all the way back to Moses, and you've got prophets and judges and kings and all these people trying to bring the people and back into God's kingdom and show them the way of truth, the way of life. And they keep going the other way. I can imagine him being discouraged and saying, well, no, probably not, but you're really the only one you know. I've tried this. You've tried this. Other prophets have tried this. These people just don't seem to care. I can understand that discouragement. I can relate to where he's coming from, because I think too many times we feel it as well. And he looks at this question, and I think he sees two things that are implied here. One, the immediate question, can bones live? And then secondly, the implied question, can Israel live? And I think that's where this completely turns around outside of this weird imagery into something that's incredibly meaningful. When Ezekiel sees this image and he sees what's happening, he goes from being discouraged to someone who is filled with an image of hope. He's given this hope directly from God. We know that there are other readings throughout the scriptures that God ultimately brings his people back from the exile to the promised land. We know that ultimately there's going to be a remnant who return and their knees never bowed to an idol. And we know that, as time goes along, he recreates the nation of Israel. And though they're taken over many times, they are always there. And he knows he's working on a plan to send Christ into this world in order to bring a worldly nation and begin the process of putting flesh back on the bones for all people. It doesn't take too much reading to get through the Gospels and start to see what God's doing. So let's look at the first one here, the one that was read for us this morning, Luke chapter 7. It was read because it's the story of how Jesus takes a prostitute And he does something incredible with her. He forgives her for sins. He takes the dry bones that she is, and he reconnects her to people. He makes her a person who is filled with hope. Or we could look at another situation in John chapter 4. You've got the woman at the well, a Samaritan woman, obviously disconnected from her fellow people, also disconnected from the place where she's supposed to worship. She can't go down to Jerusalem to worship. Her people tell her that she's supposed to worship somewhere else. She's disconnected from a great many things. But what Jesus does is he offers her living water. The woman is disconnected because of her sin, but Jesus, he doesn't just teach her, he teaches the entire community, and he reconnects her into a community of believers. He's putting flesh back on the bones. Or maybe John 21. John 21 is one I think we're all very familiar with. It's when Jesus has come back, and he goes out and he tells the people out there fishing in the boat to cast on the other side. They haul in all these fish, and immediately Peter jumps out the boat and is coming in. He knows it's the Lord at that point. And they're sitting down and they're eating a meal. And Jesus, in the midst of that meal, he starts the process of restoring Peter, forgiving him for the betrayal. And that's a hard thing to think about. But he is putting flesh back on the disciple who had betrayed him. Or we could even go one step outside the Gospels. Just flip over to Acts chapter 9. It's another story we know well. Saul of Tarsus on the road to Damascus, going out, killing, persecuting Christians, making sure that they are held accountable for what he believes is blasphemy. And God, Jesus, shines a bright light, blinds him, gives him an opportunity to have new life breathed into him, to redirect him, to give him new purpose. Jesus forgives a woman caught in adultery. He cleanses demoniacs. He heals a Gentile's daughter. Everyone who is thirsty, everyone who is weak or abused or unloved or outcast or discouraged, Jesus is bringing a message of hope, redemption, and new life. Repairing the brokenness and rebuilding a lost connection to God within each of us. It's the foundation of this entire passage in Ezekiel chapter 37. And I think it leads us to a very obvious question for ourselves. Are we dry bones? If you continue reading through the scripture, you eventually will come towards the end of the Bible and you'll hit Revelation. Chapter 2 and 3 is written to the churches in Asia Minor, and there's 7 churches specifically that are mentioned. And as you read through what's going on, you see that there are churches that are doing some things okay, need to work on some things. You see churches that have lost their first love, and then you see churches that are just way, way far away from where God wants them to be. And as we read through those, it's very easy to get the clue that they need to do some evaluation of where they're at. And if they're supposed to do some evaluation of where they're at, knowing that they've got miraculous signs going on, that they've got one of the original 12 who's writing this letter to them, if they're supposed to evaluate themselves, I think the obvious question is, why aren't we evaluating ourselves? The Laodicean church was the one that we usually associate with this writing the most. And it's the one where it talks about them being lukewarm, that God would like to spit them out of his mouth. And this is very reminiscent for them of what goes on right outside their city. They've got in Laodicea at this time a warm spring. And as people travel through and they try to draw water from this warm spring, everybody gets sick. Every single person gets sick. So when it's talked about being a lukewarm and spitting out of the mouth, it's something that they understand what John is talking about. And so the question that is inherent to us is, are we lukewarm? Are we, as dry bones, are we lukewarm in our walk with God? Are we missing something? And let's take it a step beyond that. Let's look at not just us as an individual. Let's look at us as a body. Are we like a standing pool of water that's stagnant, that's got pond scum growing on the top? Because it's something we've got to ask ourselves. The self-evaluation is inherent in Ezekiel, that those people were dry. They had wandered off from God. But God is trying his hardest to reach out and restore. And he will do that when the people are ready to come back to him. Sometimes we sing a song, it's an old hymn about how our eyes are dry. When things that should be making us weep, our eyes are dry. And our faith, it just feels old. It's lost the glamour and pizzazz that it once had. And our hearts have become hard. The things that used to really impact us in our lives, they don't seem to impact us any longer. And even our prayer life, we go through saying the same prayers over and over without thinking about it, without meaning it. The song is a perfect description of a valley of dry bones, a perfect description of a people who have lost their entire love for the Lord. And it could be a depressing song if we let it. I'm going to be very honest. If it stopped in that first verse. But the second part of it, that's what Ezekiel is about. It's about shedding hope onto a hopeless situation. It's about taking what seems to be the worst possible scenario and turning it around. The last part of that song, it's acknowledging that only God can rebuild. Only God can restore by softening up our hearts with his love. And it takes some very honest self-reflection in order to get to this point. We've got to look inside deeply, honestly, not afraid to seek the real answer of what's going on within us. And let me tell you a little secret about the Mandarin Church of Christ. This is a church building that is filled with hurting and empty people. And I don't say this because people have overwhelmingly come up here and told me, Mike, I'm hurting and I'm empty. I know this because we are a church building filled with people, and people grow empty. People hurt. We're the dry bones so many times. And it fills my heart with despair knowing that where we are could be somewhere totally different if we will only allow ourselves God's rebuilding. I think there's been a disturbing trend in American Christianity over the past 25 years. And I'm sure you've heard this phrase. You've probably said this phrase. I know I have myself. This idea of fake it till you make it. While it sounds great on the surface, I think this is one of Satan's greatest distractions. I think it's one of his greatest deceits. Because if we were being honest with ourselves, we could go to our brother and our sister and say, I need you to pray for me. If we were being honest with ourselves, we would be saying, the more I fake it, the more I forget that I am not okay in my walk with God. You believe everybody else around you is okay with God because they're faking it. You eventually start to believe you're okay, even when you're not, because you keep faking it. It is a very unhealthy way to live. And so I'm bringing us to a point this morning where I want to ask you to do some serious self-reflection. Over the past 14 months, I've gone on this wild roller coaster ride, vacillating up and down in my walk with God. And I've had to do some serious self-reflection about where I'm at, where I need to be. And I discovered a long time ago, I was the dry bones. I was the person who needed God to put flesh back on me, to breathe new life back into me. And that was the beginning of the process. There's hope throughout the entire book of Ezekiel, because that's what the prophets are. It's the doom and gloom throughout. You're going to, if you're not going to get right, you're going to be exiled. The nation is going to be destroyed. The temple is going to be gone. People will perish. It's the doom and gloom followed up by, but God is working on your behalf. The name Ezekiel literally means God strengthened him. And God is going to strengthen each and every one of us who will take this message and who will apply it and really seek out, where is the dryness in my life? He will clean up the mess that we've become. He will breathe new life into us like he did when he sent new life into those lumps of clay in Genesis. So it's time to do a little self-evaluation. What kind of shape are you in spiritually? Satan will try to distract you with things like, well, nobody's perfect. I'm doing the best I can. He'll try to distract you with the idea that nobody else can judge me. That's God's job. Can't tell me I'm doing anything wrong. He will try to distract you in every little way that he can. He will try to distract you with faking it, to you making an illusion of your entire life. He will distract you. And there's an entire book that was written by C.S. Lewis called The Screwtape Letters, in which that's the entire premise of every letter written between the demon Screwtape and his nephew Wormwood. It's distract the human, distract them, just the little things. He doesn't come to Solomon the very beginning and say, you're going to go worship a bunch of idols. He starts small, dries him out a little more, dries him out a little more, until you found Solomon just an empty husk. At the end, Solomon figured it out, though. The hope is that he figured it out. You read through Ecclesiastes, and the very, very last page there, the last paragraph, says, all this stuff is meaningless, but I know what is not meaningless. The only thing that's worth anything is to serve God, to love him, and to keep his commandments. That's the hope that we've got. That someone who can go as far away as Solomon went, if he can come back to the truth, there's no reason that we cannot come back to the truth. That God cannot breathe new life into us, that he cannot put flesh back on our bones, just like Jesus did for all of these examples through the Gospels. The truth is that God loves fixing fixer-uppers. And we are all fixer-uppers. God is seeking real followers, people who will acknowledge their brokenness and will humbly bow before his throne. People who will come to him much like the prostitute came before Jesus, brought low, who humbly cried upon his feet, washed them with her hair, and then poured perfume because she understood what Jesus was doing for her. When was the last time you stepped before the throne of God and humbly asked that he rebuild you, that he remake you, that he take you back to that excitement and that fire that you used to have? I know it's been a long time for some of us because we're all hurting to various levels. I want to encourage you this morning to do a little self-evaluation, to check on yourself and make sure that you're not faking it, that your faith is real. And if you take a moment and you find this morning that your faith is not where it needs to be, we want to help you. We want to pray over you. We want to encourage you. And maybe in turn, you will encourage us. The hope is there. God wants to give you every bit of hope available. But you have to take that first step and humbly acknowledge that you need his changing. If there's anything that we can do for you, if we can help you take that first step in the process this morning, we're gonna stand and sing in a moment, and there's going to be some folks down here who will pray over you, who will cry with you, who will be a shoulder for you. They'll wrap their arms around you and say it's going to be okay. They're going to help provide you and lead you to that hope. If you need that this morning, I'm going to ask that you come as we stand and sing.
All things